The thunderous roar of F-22 Raptors shattered the dawn silence over Falcon Ridge Air Base as three jets screamed across the Nevada desert in perfect formation. Radio chatter crackled through the control tower as pilots reported their positions. But suddenly, a fourth aircraft appeared on radar, unscheduled, unidentified, and moving with impossible precision through restricted airspace. Inside the base's elite Thunderbolt Squadron ready room, seasoned pilots gathered around the radar screen, their faces etched with concern. The mystery aircraft wasn't just in their airspace. It was executing maneuvers that defied conventional flight patterns, weaving through their formation like smoke through fingers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the aircraft vanished from radar, leaving only a single transmission echoing through the speakers. Thunderbolt led, your 6 o'clock needs work. In the corner of the ready room, a young woman in a simple flight suit looked up from her checklist, her dark eyes meeting the gaze of every pilot in the room. She said nothing, but something in her calm expression suggested she knew exactly who had just embarrassed the squadron's finest. The veterans dismissed her glance as coincidence, but Colonel James Morrison, the squadron commander, felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine as he watched her return to her preparations with unshakable composure. Lieutenant Maya Chen had always been invisible, not by choice, but by circumstance, by assumption, by the simple fact that in a world of towering egos and thunderous jet engines, quiet competence often went unnoticed. At 24, she possessed the kind of understated presence that made people look right through her, as if she were merely part of the background furniture of military life. Her black hair was always pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection, her demeanor so professionally neutral that most of her fellow pilots couldn't even remember her first name. The irony wasn't lost on her that they called her Ghost long before they knew why. It started as mockery, the rookie who seemed to fade into the walls, who spoke only when directly addressed, who appeared to glide through the corridors of Falcon Ridge Air Base without making a sound. The nickname stuck because Maya Chen had perfected the art of being present without being seen, of existing in the spaces between conversations, of listening to everything while revealing nothing about herself. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Maya had earned that call sign in a very different context years earlier. In the classified world of experimental test piloting, Ghost had been a legend. The pilot who could make aircraft do things that violated physics, who could disappear into cloud cover and emerge behind enemy targets before they knew she was there. She had flown prototypes that didn't officially exist, participated in missions that would never see the light of declassification, and earned a reputation that existed only in whispered conversations between those with the highest security clearances. But that life was behind her now, buried beneath layers of paperwork and bureaucratic maneuvering that had effectively erased her from the official record. The Maya Chen who reported to Falcon Ridge was, on paper, a promising but unremarkable rookie pilot fresh from flight school, assigned to the prestigious Thunderbolt Squadron through what everyone assumed was either bureaucratic error or diversity quotas. Her personnel file was remarkably thin, no combat experience, no advanced certifications, no indication that she was anything more than another ambitious young officer hoping to prove herself among the elite. The deception wasn't her choice. 3 years earlier, an experimental mission had gone catastrophically wrong, resulting in the loss of a prototype aircraft worth more than most countries' annual defense budgets and nearly costing Maya her life. The incident had been so classified that investigating it properly would have required admitting the existence of programs that officially didn't exist. Instead, the military had chosen the path of plausible deniability, quietly transferring her to a new identity, a clean slate, a chance to start over as someone completely different. Maya had accepted the arrangement because the alternative was a court-martial that would have destroyed not just her career, but the careers of dozens of others involved in the black projects she'd been part of. She had taken the fall, accepted the demotion in all but name, and agreed to spend the next phase of her career proving herself all over again among pilots who had no idea they were sharing their ready room with someone who had forgotten more about flying than they would ever learn. The transition had been more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Going from being a respected test pilot, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, to being treated like a rookie who needed basic instruction in aircraft systems was a special kind of psychological torture. Every day brought fresh reminders of her new status, the condescending explanations of procedures she could perform in her sleep, the skeptical looks when she demonstrated knowledge that exceeded what her file suggested she should possess, the casual dismissal of her opinions during briefings where her insights could have saved lives and resources. But Maya endured it all with the same stoic professionalism that had made her successful in her previous life. She understood that this was penance, a necessary period of proving that she could operate within normal parameters, that she could be trusted with conventional aircraft and conventional missions. What she hadn't anticipated was how personally the other pilots would take her presence, how threatened they would feel by someone who had supposedly achieved so much with so little experience. The Thunderbolt Squadron was the kind of elite unit that bred a particular type of arrogance. These were pilots who had been selected from thousands of applicants, who had survived years of increasingly difficult training, who had earned their place through demonstrated excellence in everything from air-to-air combat to precision bombing runs. They wore their achievements like armor, constantly reinforcing their superiority through elaborate hierarchies of respect based on flight hours, mission completions, and the complexity of aircraft they were qualified to fly. Into this environment walked Maya Chen, whose official record suggested she was barely qualified to handle a training aircraft, let alone the advanced fighters that were the squadron's bread and butter. The cognitive dissonance was immediate and hostile. How dare someone so inexperienced be assigned to their unit? What political considerations had led to this obvious mistake? And why did she seem so calm about the whole situation, as if she knew something they didn't? The hazing started on her first day. It was subtle at first, the kind of institutional cruelty that military units had perfected over generations of breaking in new members. Her locker was mysteriously moved to the furthest corner of the facility. Her flight gear was repeatedly, quote, borrowed without permission. Her name was somehow left off duty rosters and briefing schedules, forcing her to hunt down information that should have been automatically provided. Captain Rex Hamilton, a squadron veteran with over 2,000 flight hours and an ego to match, appointed himself as the unofficial leader of Maya's welcoming committee. Hamilton was everything that military recruiting posters tried to capture: tall, confident, with the kind of square jaw and steely gaze that looked perfect in a cockpit. He had earned his position through solid, if unspectacular, performance over 8 years of service, and he viewed Maya's presence as a personal insult to everything he had worked to achieve. "I don't know what strings you pulled to get here, Ghost," Hamilton announced during her first squadron meeting, using her nickname with deliberate mockery, "but this isn't flight school anymore. This is the real deal, and we don't have time to hold anybody's hand." The comment drew knowing chuckles from several other pilots, establishing the tone that would dominate Maya's early weeks with the unit. Hamilton's hostility was particularly galling because it was so professionally wrapped. He never quite crossed the line into overt harassment, never said anything that could be clearly identified as inappropriate in an official report. Instead, he orchestrated a campaign of professional isolation and technical intimidation, designed to make Maya question her place in the squadron, and ideally convince her to request a transfer to a more suitable unit. During pre-flight briefings, Hamilton would pose increasingly technical questions about aircraft systems and flight procedures, questions that seemed designed to expose the gaps in Maya's official training record. He would challenge her understanding of weapon systems she wasn't supposed to be familiar with, demand explanations of tactical principles that exceeded her supposed experience level, and generally create an atmosphere where every conversation felt like an oral examination she was expected to fail. Maya's responses frustrated him beyond measure. She answered his questions with calm precision, demonstrating knowledge that should have been beyond her supposed capabilities, but she did so without any trace of smugness or superiority. When he challenged her on advanced avionics systems, she provided textbook-perfect explanations. When he questioned her understanding of air combat maneuvering, she outlined tactical principles with the kind of clarity that suggested deep, practical experience. But she never volunteered information beyond what was asked, never corrected his occasional errors, never gave any indication that she was anything more than a well-prepared student who had done her homework. The other squadron members watched these exchanges with growing fascination. Some sided with Hamilton, viewing Maya's competence as suspicious and potentially threatening to the unit's established order. Others began to respect her grace under pressure, the way she handled Hamilton's challenges without ever losing her professional composure or stooping to his level of petty antagonism. But none of them suspected the truth, that Maya was holding back not because she lacked knowledge, but because she possessed far too much. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez was the first to sense that something didn't add up. Rodriguez was the squadron's intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed analyst who had earned her pilot's wings through sheer determination, despite coming from a background in data analysis rather than traditional flight training. She had learned to read people the way she read intelligence reports, looking for inconsistencies, patterns, and hidden meanings that others might miss. What Rodriguez noticed about Maya wasn't any single dramatic revelation, but rather an accumulation of small details that suggested a story far more complex than her personnel file indicated. There was the way Maya's hands moved during pre-flight checks, with the kind of automatic precision that came from thousands of hours of experience rather than recent training. There was her unconscious tendency to scan the horizon in specific patterns that suggested advanced tactical awareness. There was the fact that she seemed to anticipate aircraft behavior in ways that should have required years of flying time to develop. Most telling of all was Maya's reaction to emergency situations. During a routine training flight, when Lieutenant Tommy Park's engine began showing irregular readings that could have indicated imminent failure, Maya was the first to identify the problem and suggest the appropriate response. Her radio call was calm, precise, and exactly what a veteran instructor pilot would have recommended, but it came from someone who was supposed to be learning these procedures for the first time. Rodriguez began to pay closer attention, not out of suspicion or hostility like Hamilton, but out of genuine curiosity about who Maya really was. She noticed that Maya never seemed surprised by anything that happened in the squadron, as if she had seen it all before. She observed that Maya's technical knowledge extended far beyond what her training record suggested, encompassing systems and procedures that weren't even taught in standard flight school curricula. Most intriguingly, she caught Maya occasionally using terminology and references that seemed to come from classified briefings or advanced training programs. The mystery deepened when Rodriguez attempted to research Maya's background through informal channels. Military communities were usually small and interconnected. Pilots moved between bases, instructors rotated through different training programs, and everyone knew someone who had served with everyone else. But Maya Chen seemed to have appeared from nowhere, with no shared connections, no common acquaintances, no trail of relationships that typically followed military personnel throughout their careers. When Rodriguez casually mentioned Maya to friends at other bases, she was met with blank stares. When she tried to track down her flight school instructors, she discovered that the records were surprisingly vague, and the personnel involved had moved on to assignments that were difficult to contact. It was as if Maya's past had been deliberately obscured, not through incompetence or bureaucratic error, but through careful, systematic editing. Colonel Morrison, the squadron commander, presented a different challenge for Maya. Morrison was a political animal as much as a pilot, someone who had risen through the ranks as much through strategic networking as through flying ability. He was acutely sensitive to anything that might reflect poorly on his command, and Maya's presence created multiple potential problems that he was struggling to navigate. On one hand, Morrison couldn't ignore the fact that Maya had been assigned to his squadron through official channels, with all the appropriate paperwork and authorizations. Her personnel file, thin as it was, contained no obvious red flags, and her performance during initial evaluations had been satisfactory, if not spectacular. From a purely administrative perspective, there was no justification for questioning her assignment or requesting her transfer. On the other hand, Morrison was increasingly aware of the tension Maya's presence was creating within the squadron. Hamilton's hostility was becoming more obvious and potentially problematic, especially if it escalated to the point where Maya might file a formal complaint. The other pilots were choosing sides, creating factions that could undermine unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Most concerning of all, Morrison was beginning to notice things about Maya that made him wonder if her official story was complete. Like Rodriguez, Morrison was troubled by the inconsistencies in Maya's background and behavior. During their few one-on-one conversations, she had demonstrated knowledge and insight that seemed far beyond her supposed experience level. Her questions during briefings were too sophisticated, her understanding of complex tactical situations too nuanced, her overall demeanor too composed for someone who should have been struggling with the transition to such an elite unit. Morrison had served long enough to recognize when someone was operating undercover or working within a compartmentalized program that required secrecy. He had encountered pilots whose official records didn't match their actual capabilities, whose presence in his unit served purposes beyond the obvious ones. Maya had all the hallmarks of someone with a classified background, but he couldn't determine what that background might be or why she had been placed in his squadron. The colonel found himself in the uncomfortable position of commanding someone whose true qualifications and mission he couldn't assess. If Maya was indeed operating under some form of cover, interfering with her assignment could have career-ending consequences for Morrison. If she was simply what her records indicated, allowing the current situation to continue could destroy his squadron's morale and effectiveness. Either way, he needed more information than he currently possessed. Morrison's attempts to gather that information through official channels proved frustratingly fruitless. When he contacted personnel offices about Maya's assignment, he was told that everything had been processed correctly and that no additional information was available. When he tried to reach her previous commanding officers, he discovered that many of them were no longer accessible through normal military channels. The few contacts he could reach provided only vague, carefully neutral assessments that revealed nothing about Maya's actual capabilities or background. The situation became more complex when Morrison received an unexpected visit from Colonel Patricia Reeves, a senior officer from Air Force Special Operations Command, whom he hadn't seen in several years. Reeves arrived without fanfare or advance notice, ostensibly on a routine inspection tour, but her questions during their private meeting focused exclusively on Maya Chen and her integration into the squadron. "How is Lieutenant Chen adapting to her new assignment?" Reeves asked, with a kind of casual tone that suggested the question was anything but casual. Morrison recognized the technique. Intelligence officers and senior commanders often used this approach when they needed information but couldn't reveal why they needed it. Morrison chose his words carefully. "She's proving to be a competent pilot, perhaps more competent than her file would suggest." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He watched Reeves's reaction closely, looking for any indication of whether he was providing the information she wanted or walking into a trap. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. It's not uncommon for personnel files to be incomplete, especially when transfers happen quickly or under unusual circumstances. Sometimes pilots find themselves in situations where their full background can't be immediately documented. She paused, letting the implications of her statement settle. The important thing is that she's performing her duties satisfactorily and not creating problems for your unit. The conversation was clearly a warning, though Morrison couldn't determine exactly what he was being warned about. Was Reeves telling him to stop investigating Maya's background? Was she confirming his suspicions that Maya was operating under some form of classified assignment? Or was she simply reminding him that his job was to command his squadron effectively regardless of the personal mysteries of individual pilots? Morrison left the meeting with more questions than answers, but with a clearer understanding that Maya Chen was connected to something far beyond his security clearance or need to know. He decided to adopt a policy of careful observation, monitoring the situation without actively interfering, hoping that time would either resolve the mystery or provide him with the information he needed to make appropriate decisions. Meanwhile, Maya continued to navigate the complex social dynamics of the squadron with the same careful precision she brought to everything else. She understood that her situation was inherently unstable. Too much competence would raise suspicious questions. Too little would confirm the negative assumptions many pilots had already formed about her. She needed to find a narrow path between proving herself worthy of respect and revealing capabilities that would expose her true background. The balance was exhausting in ways that her previous covert assignments had never been. Flying experimental aircraft through hostile territory, executing missions that existed only in the imaginations of strategic planners, pushing the boundaries of human and mechanical performance. These challenges had been dangerous and demanding, but they had also been straightforward. Success or failure could be measured in objective terms, and Maya had always excelled at meeting clearly defined objectives. But navigating the social and political complexities of military life, as someone pretending to be less than she actually was, required different skills and constant vigilance. Every conversation was a potential trap, every demonstration of competence, a risk of exposure, every interaction, an opportunity to make mistakes that could unravel her carefully constructed new identity. Maya found herself developing new techniques for managing these challenges. She learned to ask questions she already knew the answers to, creating the impression that she was still learning while actually gathering information about her squadron mates' knowledge and attitudes. She practiced making small, deliberate errors that would reinforce her rookie status without compromising safety or mission effectiveness. Most importantly, she learned to listen, really listen, to the conversations around her. understanding not just what people said, but what they meant, what they feared, and what they hoped for. The other pilots gradually began to reveal themselves to her through these conversations. Hamilton's hostility, she realized, stemmed less from genuine concern about squadron standards than from deep-seated insecurity about his own position. He had worked harder than many of his peers to achieve his current status, and he viewed anyone who seemed to advance too quickly as a threat to the merit-based system he believed in. His antagonism toward Maya was his way of defending not just his own position, but the entire structure of earned privilege that gave his career meaning. Rodriguez's curiosity, by contrast, seemed to spring from intellectual honesty rather than insecurity. She was genuinely interested in understanding how people and systems worked, and Maya's inconsistencies presented a puzzle that challenged Rodriguez's analytical nature. Maya's sense that Rodriguez could become either a valuable ally or a dangerous opponent, depending on what conclusions she eventually reached about Maya's true background. The younger pilots in the squadron, recent graduates like Lieutenant Jason Kim and Lieutenant Amanda Brooks, viewed Maya with a mixture of sympathy and opportunism. They identified with her apparent struggle to fit into the unit, but they also recognized that her presence provided them with someone lower on the social hierarchy, someone they could look down on, to bolster their own fragile confidence. Maya understood this dynamic and chose not to resent it. They were all products of a system that demanded constant competition for limited opportunities, and their behavior was entirely predictable given their circumstances. As weeks passed, Maya began to develop a grudging appreciation for the complexity of normal military life. Her previous assignments had insulated her from many of the petty politics and social dynamics that defined most military units. Test piloting was largely solitary work, and the small communities of experimental aviation operated under different rules than conventional squadrons. The need to maintain absolute secrecy created bonds between personnel that transcended normal military hierarchies, and the shared understanding that they were all involved in something special eliminated many of the competitive pressures that plagued regular units. But Falcon Ridge Air Base operated according to traditional military culture, with all its benefits and drawbacks. Maya was experiencing for the first time the full spectrum of military social life, the camaraderie that developed between pilots who trusted each other with their lives, the professional jealousies that arose from competing for promotions and prestigious assignments, the complex relationships between officers of different ranks and experience levels, and the constant balancing act between individual achievement and unit cohesion. She found herself oddly fascinated by these dynamics, even as they frustrated her. There was something pure about the way Hamilton approached his hostility toward her. He genuinely believed that maintaining high standards required challenging anyone who seemed to have achieved success too easily. There was something admirable about Rodriguez's intellectual curiosity, even though it posed a significant threat to Maya's cover. There was something touching about the younger pilot's struggles to find their place in a demanding profession, even though their treatment of her was sometimes callous. Maya began to understand that her current assignment was teaching her things about military life that her previous career had never provided. For all the advanced training and classified missions she had completed, she had never really learned what it meant to be an ordinary military officer, dealing with ordinary military problems, working within the constraints of ordinary military procedures. The experience was humbling and educational in ways she hadn't expected. The education became more intense when the squadron received orders for a major training exercise that would test every pilot's skills and potentially determine future assignments. Exercise Red Eagle was a massive, multi-day combat simulation that brought together several squadrons from different bases to participate in realistic air combat scenarios. Performance during Red Eagle could make or break careers, and the exercise was particularly significant for newer pilots trying to establish their reputations. For Maya, Red Eagle represented both an opportunity and a threat. Strong performance would help establish her credibility within the squadron and might finally earn her the respect of pilots like Hamilton. But exceptional performance would raise questions about how someone with her limited experience could compete against veterans with thousands of flight hours. She needed to find a way to succeed without succeeding too dramatically, to prove herself worthy of the Thunderbolt Squadron without revealing capabilities that would expose her true background. The preparation for Red Eagle intensified all the existing tensions within the squadron. Hamilton became even more aggressive in his criticism of Maya, questioning whether she was ready for such a demanding exercise and suggesting that her participation might endanger other pilots. Rodriguez increased her observation of Maya's behavior, clearly hoping that the high-stress environment would reveal whatever secrets Maya was hiding. Morrison worried that the exercise would either expose Maya as incompetent, creating a major embarrassment for his squadron, or reveal her as far more capable than her records suggested, creating different but equally problematic questions. Maya approached the preparation with characteristic methodical precision. She studied the exercise scenarios with the same intensity she had once brought to classified mission planning, but she was careful to ask questions and seek guidance in ways that reinforced her rookie status. She practiced maneuvers and procedures with dedicated focus, but she deliberately introduced small imperfections that would make her performance seem like the result of hard work rather than natural talent or extensive previous experience. Most challenging of all, Maya had to prepare mentally for the possibility that the exercise would force her to reveal more of her true capabilities than she wanted. Air combat, even simulated air combat, had a way of stripping away pretense and exposing people's real natures. Under pressure, with adrenaline flowing and split-second decisions required, it would be difficult to maintain the careful balance she had established between competence and inexperience. As the date for Red Eagle approached, Maya found herself thinking more and more about her previous life, about the pilot she had been before bureaucracy and politics had forced her into this elaborate masquerade. She remembered the pure joy of flying without constraints, of pushing aircraft and herself to the absolute limits of performance, of being part of a small community of aviators who understood that they were doing work that few people could even imagine. She missed that life intensely, but she also understood that it was gone forever. The person she had been, the ghost who had become legendary in certain classified circles, existed now only in heavily redacted files and whispered conversations between people with the highest security clearances. The Maya Chen who reported for duty at Falcon Ridge Air Base each morning was all that remained, and she needed to make this new identity work if she wanted to continue flying at all. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now living the kind of normal military life that she had once viewed with a mixture of contempt and envy. As a test pilot, she had sometimes encountered regular squadron pilots, and wondered what it would be like to fly the same aircraft repeatedly, to work with the same people day after day, to operate within the predictable rhythms of conventional military life. Now she knew, and the reality was far more complex and demanding than she had anticipated. But there was also something valuable in this experience, something that was making her a better pilot and a better person, even as it tested her patience and self-control. She was learning about leadership, about teamwork, about the human dimensions of military service that her previous assignments had largely shielded her from. She was discovering that there was honor in ordinary service, dignity in working within established systems, and satisfaction in earning respect through demonstrated competence rather than mystique and secrecy. As Red Eagle drew closer, Maya realized that the exercise would likely mark the end of one phase of her new life and the beginning of another. Whatever happened during those few days of intense competition and evaluation, she would emerge with a clearer understanding of her place in the Thunderbolt Squadron and her future in conventional military service. The only question was whether that emergence would come at the cost of the carefully constructed anonymity that had allowed her to survive the transition from her previous life. The Nevada sun hung mercilessly in the pre-dawn sky as Red Eagle commenced with the kind of military precision that left no room for error. Maya stood beside her assigned F-16 Fighting Falcon, running through pre-flight checks with movements that appeared methodical but unremarkable to the casual observer. Around her, 37 other pilots prepared their aircraft with varying degrees of confidence and nervous energy, the air thick with jet fuel fumes and competitive tension. Captain Hamilton emerged from the briefing hangar with his characteristic swagger, his flight suit bearing patches that told the story of his 8-year career in meticulous detail. He paused near Maya's aircraft, ostensibly to inspect his own nearby F-16, but his real purpose became clear when he spoke loud enough for several other pilots to hear. "Hope you've been practicing your emergency procedures, Ghost," he said with manufactured concern. "Red Eagle has a way of exposing pilots who aren't ready for the real thing. Wouldn't want you to wash out in front of everyone." His comment drew knowing looks from his supporters, who had gathered around him like disciples seeking approval from their leader. Maya continued her pre-flight inspection without acknowledging the comment, her hands moving over control surfaces and weapon systems with practiced efficiency. She had learned that responding to Hamilton's provocations only encouraged him, and she had developed an almost zen-like ability to let his words pass through her consciousness without taking root. But internally she was calculating, preparing for scenarios that Hamilton couldn't even imagine. Lieutenant Rodriguez watched the exchange from beside her own aircraft, her analytical mind processing the subtle dynamics at play. Over the past weeks, she had compiled an impressive collection of observations about Maya that didn't align with her official status. There was the way Maya's eyes tracked other aircraft during formation flights, anticipating movements before they happened. There was her unconscious use of tactical terminology that wasn't taught in standard flight school. Most intriguingly, there was her reaction to classified briefings. Not the wide-eyed absorption of someone learning new information, but the careful attention of someone confirming details they already knew. The first day of Red Eagle would test basic air-to-air combat skills through a series of one-on-one engagements that would determine seeding for the more complex scenarios later in the exercise. Pilots were assigned opponents through a carefully designed bracket system that theoretically ensured fair matchups based on experience and skill levels. Maya found herself paired against Lieutenant David Walsh, a competent, if unspectacular pilot, with 4 years of experience and a reputation for solid, textbook flying. Walsh approached the matchup with confidence bordering on cockiness. He had reviewed Maya's thin personnel file and assumed he was facing an easy victory that would boost his standing in the exercise rankings. During their pre-flight briefing, he offered condescending advice about air combat maneuvering and suggested that Maya shouldn't feel bad about losing to a more experienced pilot. "The thing about BFM is that it's all about experience," Walsh explained, using the military acronym for basic fighter maneuvers with the tone of someone educating a student. "You can't learn this stuff from books or simulators. It takes time in the cockpit, time under pressure, time making mistakes and learning from them. Don't take it personally when this doesn't go your way." Maya nodded politely and thanked him for the advice, maintaining the demeanor of a grateful rookie receiving wisdom from a veteran. But behind her calm exterior, she was already planning the engagement with the kind of tactical sophistication that would have impressed senior air combat instructors. She knew exactly how Walsh would approach the fight. Aggressively but predictably, relying on standard maneuvers that he had practiced countless times but never truly mastered. The engagement took place in a designated airspace box 50 miles northeast of Falcon Ridge, monitored by range controllers and recorded by multiple camera systems for later analysis. Both pilots started at opposite ends of the box, flying toward each other at medium altitude until the range controller called "Fights On," signaling the beginning of combat. Walsh immediately pulled his F-16 into a climbing turn, attempting to gain altitude advantage while positioning himself for a head-on engagement. It was exactly the kind of textbook opening that Maya had expected, and she responded with what appeared to be an equally conventional countermaneuver. To observers on the ground, the initial moments of the fight looked like a standard engagement between pilots of roughly equal skill, but Maya was operating on multiple levels simultaneously. While executing maneuvers that appeared appropriate for her supposed experience level, she was also reading Walsh's intentions with uncanny accuracy, anticipating his next moves based on subtle cues in his aircraft's behavior. She allowed him to gain the initial advantage, letting him settle into the kind of confident rhythm that would make him vulnerable to techniques he wouldn't see coming. The turning fight that developed was a masterpiece of controlled deception. Maya flew aggressively enough to make the engagement interesting, but she deliberately made small errors that reinforced her rookie status while setting up Walsh for a tactical surprise that would end the fight decisively. She let him think he was controlling the engagement, allowed him to believe his superior experience was telling, right up until the moment she demonstrated that everything he thought he knew about air combat was incomplete. The kill shot came after 8 minutes of maneuvering that had both pilots pulling heavy Gs and testing the limits of their aircraft's performance. Walsh had positioned himself for what he believed would be a decisive attack, lining up for a shot that should have ended the engagement in his favor. But at the critical moment, Maya executed a maneuver that seemed to violate the laws of physics, using her aircraft's energy state in a way that Walsh had never seen before. The F-16 responded to Maya's control inputs like an extension of her will, transitioning from defensive maneuvering to offensive positioning with breathtaking speed and precision. Walsh found himself staring at a missile lock tone in his headphones and a HUD display showing that Maya had achieved an impossible firing solution from a position where she should have had no tactical advantage. "Falcon 27, you're dead," came the range controller's voice over the radio, confirming what Walsh's instruments were already telling him. The engagement was over, and he had been decisively defeated by a pilot who wasn't supposed to possess the skills necessary to outmaneuver him. The flight back to base was conducted in radio silence, both pilots processing what had just happened in very different ways. Walsh was struggling to understand how his tactical advantages had evaporated so quickly, replaying the engagement in his mind, and trying to identify where his strategy had failed. Maya was carefully planning her post-flight debrief, preparing explanations for her performance that would satisfy observers without revealing the depth of her actual capabilities. The debrief session drew a larger audience than usual, as word of the upset had spread quickly through the pilot community. Walsh gamely attempted to explain his defeat in terms of lucky breaks and beginner's intuition, but his explanations sounded hollow even to himself. Maya contributed to the discussion with appropriate humility, crediting her performance to careful preparation and good coaching, while deflecting questions that might have revealed her true background. Hamilton listened to the debrief with growing unease. He had expected Walsh to handle Maya easily, providing confirmation that she didn't belong in the squadron and justification for his ongoing campaign of intimidation. Instead, Maya had demonstrated capabilities that demanded serious reconsideration of his assumptions about her background and qualifications. Colonel Morrison observed the proceedings with the practiced eye of someone who had seen hundreds of similar debriefs over his career. What troubled him wasn't Maya's victory. Upsets happened in air combat training, and sometimes rookie pilots did achieve surprising results through preparation and determination. What troubled him was the specific way she had won, using techniques that suggested far more advanced training than her personnel file indicated. Rodriguez took extensive notes during the debrief, adding to her growing collection of evidence that Maya Chen was not what she appeared to be. The maneuvers Maya had executed were not lucky accidents or intuitive responses. They were sophisticated tactical applications that required extensive practice and deep understanding of advanced combat principles. Rodriguez was becoming increasingly certain that Maya's background included training and experience that weren't reflected in any accessible records. The second day of Red Eagle escalated the complexity significantly, moving from individual combat to small formation engagements that tested pilots' abilities to work as teams while maintaining individual effectiveness. Maya found herself assigned to a four-ship formation led by Hamilton himself, an arrangement that she suspected was designed to put her in a position where any failures would be highly visible, and any successes could be attributed to Hamilton's leadership. The mission scenario involved intercepting a simulated enemy bomber formation, protected by escort fighters, a classic air superiority challenge that required precise coordination and aggressive execution. Hamilton briefed the mission with particular emphasis on the importance of following his instructions exactly, making it clear that he considered Maya a weak link who might compromise the formation's effectiveness. "Ghost, I want you on my wing," Hamilton announced during the briefing, using a tone that suggested he was doing her a favor. "Stay close, follow my lead, and try not to get in the way. This isn't the kind of mission where we can afford rookie mistakes." The other pilots in the formation nodded their agreement, accepting Hamilton's assessment of Maya's capabilities without question. Maya acknowledged the instructions with appropriate deference, but internally she was analyzing the mission parameters with the kind of strategic thinking that Hamilton couldn't access. She understood that his plan was tactically sound but unimaginative, the kind of straightforward approach that would succeed through superior numbers and firepower rather than tactical innovation. She also understood that his decision to keep her close was motivated more by distrust than by any desire to protect her. The engagement unfolded exactly as Maya had predicted. Hamilton led the formation into a conventional attack that relied on overwhelming the enemy escorts through coordinated assault. The plan worked adequately, achieving the mission objectives with acceptable losses, but it did so through brute force rather than tactical elegance. Maya followed orders precisely, contributing to the formation's success while carefully avoiding any actions that might overshadow Hamilton's leadership. But the real test came when the carefully planned mission deteriorated into chaos, as military operations inevitably did when they encountered the friction of real-world complications. One of the formation's aircraft suffered a simulated engine failure at a critical moment, forcing the pilot to break off his attack and potentially leaving a gap in the formation's defensive coverage. Hamilton's response was competent but slow, as he struggled to adapt his rigid plan to the new circumstances. Maya saw the developing crisis before Hamilton did, recognizing patterns in the enemy formation's behavior that indicated they were preparing to exploit the temporary weakness. She faced a critical decision: follow orders and maintain her subordinate position while the mission potentially failed, or take initiative that would reveal capabilities far beyond her supposed experience level. The choice was made for her when Lieutenant Kim, the pilot with the simulated engine failure, found himself in genuine danger as enemy fighters moved to exploit his vulnerability. Maya couldn't stand by and watch a fellow pilot face consequences for a situation that could be prevented through proper tactical response. She broke formation without permission, executing a high-speed intercept that positioned her to engage the enemy fighters before they could achieve a firing solution on Kim. Her radio call was crisp and professional, cutting through the tactical frequency chatter with unmistakable authority. Falcon lead. Ghost engaging bandits threatening Falcon 3. Recommend immediate support on bearing 270. She didn't wait for Hamilton's response before committing to the engagement, understanding that hesitation would cost lives in any real-world scenario. The air combat that followed lasted less than 3 minutes but showcased flying that left observers speechless. Maya engaged 4 enemy fighters simultaneously, using energy management and tactical positioning that seemed to bend the laws of physics to her will. She defeated each opponent in turn, not through lucky shots or desperate maneuvers, but through systematic application of advanced air combat principles that most pilots only read about in classified tactical manuals. Hamilton watched the engagement unfold with a mixture of awe and professional horror. Maya was flying his aircraft, his F-16, with a level of precision and tactical sophistication that exceeded his own capabilities by a significant margin. Every maneuver was perfectly executed, every tactical decision was precisely timed, and every shot was placed with the kind of accuracy that suggested thousands of hours of combat experience. When the engagement ended with all 4 enemy fighters defeated and Kim safely returned to formation, the tactical frequency fell silent except for the range controller's voice confirming the results. Maya had single-handedly turned a potentially disastrous situation into a decisive victory, but she had done so by revealing capabilities that no rookie pilot should possess. The flight back to base was conducted in tense silence, with each pilot processing what they had witnessed in their own way. Hamilton struggled with the realization that his assumptions about Maya were not just wrong, but catastrophically incorrect. Kim flew with the grateful awareness that Maya had probably saved his life, even in a training scenario. The other formation members wrestled with the cognitive dissonance of having their understanding of squadron dynamics completely overturned in the space of 3 minutes. Maya used the return flight to prepare for the inevitable questions and consequences that would follow her decision to reveal her true capabilities. She understood that maintaining her cover was no longer possible, but she hoped to control the revelation process and minimize the bureaucratic chaos that would inevitably follow. The post-mission debrief was unlike anything the squadron had experienced before. Colonel Morrison led the session personally, his questions probing and specific as he attempted to understand exactly what had happened and what it meant for his unit. Maya answered each question honestly but carefully, acknowledging her training and experience while avoiding details that might compromise ongoing classified programs. Lieutenant Chen, Morrison began, using her formal name rather than her call sign. Your performance today suggests training and experience that isn't reflected in your personnel file. I think it's time we had a conversation about your actual background and qualifications. Maya met his gaze steadily, understanding that the moment of truth had finally arrived. Yes, sir. I believe that conversation is overdue. Her response was calm and professional, but it carried undertones that suggested complex explanations would be forthcoming. Hamilton sat in stunned silence throughout the debrief, his worldview systematically dismantled by the evidence of Maya's true capabilities. Everything he thought he knew about merit, experience, and squadron hierarchies had been revealed as incomplete at best, entirely wrong at worst. The pilot he had dismissed as unqualified had just demonstrated flying skills that surpassed his own by a humbling margin. Rodriguez felt a mixture of vindication and excitement as her weeks of observation and analysis were finally validated. She had known that Maya was hiding something significant, but even her most creative theories hadn't prepared her for the reality of what Maya had just revealed. The implications were staggering. Who was Maya really, and why had she been placed in their squadron under false pretenses? As the debrief concluded and pilots dispersed to analyze the day's lessons, Maya remained behind for the private conversation that Morrison had requested. She understood that her carefully constructed new identity was about to undergo major revision, But she also felt a sense of relief that the exhausting performance of mediocrity was finally ending. The conversation that followed would reshape not only Maya's position within the squadron, but the entire understanding of what the Thunderbolt Squadron was capable of achieving. Morrison's questions were professional and precise, designed to extract maximum information while respecting whatever classification boundaries Maya was operating under. "I've been a pilot for over 20 years, Morrison began, and I've never seen flying like what you demonstrated today. That wasn't luck, and it wasn't beginner's intuition. Those were advanced combat techniques that require extensive training and practice to master. I need to understand who you really are and why you're here." Maya chose her words carefully, understanding that Morrison deserved honest answers while recognizing that complete disclosure might not be possible given the classified nature of her background. "Sir, my official personnel file is accurate as far as it goes, but it's deliberately incomplete. I've been assigned to your squadron as part of a broader evaluation program that required me to operate under limited disclosure of my actual qualifications." Morrison nodded, having suspected something along these lines but wanting confirmation. What kind of evaluation program, and who authorized it? His questions were getting to the heart of the administrative complexities that Maya had been hoping to avoid. "That information is classified beyond my authority to share, sir," Maya replied, "but I can tell you that Colonel Reeves from Special Operations Command is my primary contact for this assignment, and she has the authority to provide additional details if you require them for command purposes." The mention of Colonel Reeves explained several things that had been puzzling Morrison, including the mysterious visit and cryptic conversation from several weeks earlier. He was beginning to understand that Maya's presence in his squadron was part of something much larger and more complex than he had initially realized. "And your actual qualifications?" Morrison asked. "Because what you demonstrated today suggests training that goes far beyond what any normal pilot receives." Maya hesitated, understanding that her answer would determine how the next phase of her assignment would unfold. "I'm a graduate of the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base, with extensive experience in experimental aircraft and advanced combat systems. My previous assignments have been classified, but I can confirm that I have significantly more flight time and combat training than my current file indicates." Morrison processed this information with the growing realization that he had been commanding one of the military's most elite pilots without knowing it. The implications were both exciting and troubling. Exciting because it meant his squadron had access to capabilities he hadn't known existed. Troubling because it raised questions about what other secrets might be hidden within his command structure. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Morrison extracting as much information as Maya's security clearances would allow her to share. By the end, he had a much clearer picture of who Maya really was and why she had been assigned to his squadron, though many questions remained unanswered. As Maya left Morrison's office, she understood that her carefully constructed normal military life was about to become much more complicated. Word of her performance during Red Eagle would spread throughout the pilot community, and maintaining any semblance of anonymity would be impossible. She was about to discover whether the skills that had made her legendary in classified circles would translate to success in the conventional military world. The third day of Red Eagle would test large formation tactics and strategic planning, scenarios that required pilots to think beyond individual combat and consider broader operational objectives. Maya's revelation had fundamentally changed the dynamics within the Thunderbolt Squadron, and the upcoming challenges would determine whether her exposure would strengthen or destabilize the unit. Hamilton spent that evening in his quarters, staring at combat footage from the day's missions and trying to reconcile what he had witnessed with everything he thought he knew about flying and military hierarchies. The pilot he had spent weeks undermining had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded his own by margins that were both humbling and educational. Rodriguez worked late into the night, researching everything she could find about test pilot programs and classified aviation projects, trying to understand the world that Maya had emerged from. Her analytical mind was processing the implications of having someone with Maya's background embedded in a conventional squadron, and the possibilities were both exciting and concerning. Morrison sat in his office, reviewing Maya's personnel file one more time and understanding for the first time how carefully it had been constructed to hide rather than reveal. Every entry was technically accurate but deliberately misleading, creating the impression of a standard pilot while concealing the reality of someone with extraordinary qualifications. Maya herself spent the evening preparing for the next phase of her assignment, understanding that her role within the squadron was about to change dramatically. The comfortable anonymity that had protected her for months was gone, replaced by the kind of attention and scrutiny that she had hoped to avoid. But she was also beginning to understand that her exposure might serve purposes beyond her original mission parameters. The stage was set for the final days of Red Eagle, when Maya's true capabilities would be fully tested, and the Thunderbolt Squadron would discover what it meant to have a legend flying in their formation. The revelation had changed everything, and the consequences would reshape not only Maya's future, but the entire understanding of what elite military aviation could achieve. The emergency klaxon pierced the pre-dawn stillness at Falcon Ridge Air Base with the kind of urgent intensity that sent adrenaline coursing through every pilot's veins. Maya bolted upright in her quarters, instantly alert despite having been in deep sleep moments before. Years of classified operations had conditioned her to respond to crisis situations with immediate mental clarity, but this alarm carried a different tone than the routine training alerts she had grown accustomed to during her months with the Thunderbolt Squadron. The base intercom crackled to life with Colonel Morrison's voice, tense and commanding in a way that indicated this was no drill. All pilots report to the ready room immediately. This is not an exercise. Repeat, this is not an exercise. We have a real-world emergency situation developing. The announcement was followed by the sound of boots hitting floors throughout the squadron dormitories, as 38 pilots responded to the call with the kind of disciplined urgency that defined military aviation. Maya dressed rapidly, her mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had served her during countless classified missions. Real-world emergencies during major training exercises were unusual, but not unprecedented, and they typically involved either aircraft accidents or security threats that required immediate military response. As she made her way to the ready room, she noticed the controlled chaos that characterized military bases responding to genuine crises. Security personnel at heightened alert, ground crews preparing aircraft with unusual speed, and support staff moving with the kind of focused intensity that indicated something significant was happening. The ready room was packed beyond its normal capacity when Maya arrived, with pilots from multiple squadrons gathering to receive briefing information that would determine their immediate response to whatever crisis had developed. Colonel Morrison stood at the front of the room beside a large display screen showing what appeared to be a radar tracking plot, with multiple aircraft contacts moving in patterns that immediately caught Maya's attention. "Gentlemen and ladies," Morrison began, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that helped maintain order during chaotic situations. "We have a developing situation that requires immediate response from available aircraft. Approximately 40 minutes ago, a civilian Gulfstream G650 departed from a private airfield in Mexico without filing a flight plan or establishing contact with air traffic control. The aircraft is currently flying north toward the United States border at high altitude and high speed, maintaining radio silence despite repeated attempts at communication." The display screen updated to show the aircraft's projected flight path, which would bring it across the border and into heavily populated areas of Southern California within the next hour. Maya studied the tracking data with growing concern, recognizing patterns in the aircraft's flight profile that suggested this was far from a simple navigation error or communication failure. Morrison continued his briefing with the kind of methodical detail that helped pilots understand the full scope of their mission requirements. Intelligence suggests this aircraft may be involved in either smuggling operations or potentially hostile activities. The pilot has ignored all attempts at radio contact and has altered course multiple times in ways that suggest deliberate evasion of tracking systems. We've been tasked with intercepting this aircraft and determining its intentions before it reaches populated areas. The mission parameters were complex and potentially dangerous, requiring pilots to balance multiple conflicting objectives while operating under rules of engagement that could change rapidly based on the aircraft's behavior. They needed to establish contact with the civilian aircraft, determine whether it posed a genuine threat, and be prepared to take appropriate action if it proved hostile while avoiding any actions that might endanger innocent civilians. Captain Hamilton raised his hand, his expression reflecting the kind of professional concern that superseded personal conflicts during genuine emergencies. "Sir, what's our intelligence assessment regarding the threat level? Are we dealing with possible terrorism, or is this more likely a smuggling operation that got out of hand?" His question reflected the tactical thinking that separated competent military pilots from exceptional ones. Understanding the nature of the threat was essential for determining appropriate response strategies. Morrison's answer revealed the complexity of the situation they were facing. Intelligence is inconclusive at this point. The aircraft's flight profile is consistent with either scenario, and the pilot's refusal to respond to communications suggests either hostile intent or significant desperation. We're treating this as a potential national security threat, while maintaining readiness to de-escalate if the situation proves to be less serious than it appears. Maya absorbed the briefing information while simultaneously analyzing the tactical implications of the mission they were about to undertake. Intercepting unidentified aircraft was one of the most challenging missions in military aviation, requiring pilots to balance aggressive positioning with careful restraint to demonstrate overwhelming force while maintaining options for peaceful resolution. Her classified background included extensive experience with exactly these kinds of scenarios, but revealing that experience would compromise the careful balance she had established within the squadron. The aircraft assignments reflected Morrison's growing understanding of Maya's true capabilities, though he was careful not to make her role too prominent given the ongoing questions about her background and qualifications. She would fly as wingman to Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been selected to lead one of 2 4-ship formations tasked with intercepting the unknown aircraft. The assignment placed Maya in a position where she could contribute her expertise without taking primary responsibility for mission success. Rodriguez acknowledged her formation assignment with visible satisfaction, understanding that she had been chosen for leadership responsibilities based on her analytical skills and demonstrated ability to handle complex tactical situations. She also recognized that having Maya as her wingman provided access to capabilities that might prove crucial if the mission developed complications beyond the scope of standard intercept procedures. The pre-flight briefing was conducted with the kind of intense focus that characterized real-world military operations, every detail carefully reviewed, and contingency plans established for multiple possible scenarios. Maya contributed to the tactical discussion with measured professionalism, offering insights that were valuable without being so sophisticated that they raised questions about her supposed experience level. The aircraft's altitude and speed suggest either panic or deliberate evasion, Maya observed during the formation briefing. If it's panic, aggressive intercept posturing might cause the pilot to make dangerous decisions. If it's deliberate evasion, we need to be prepared for the possibility that this aircraft has capabilities we haven't been briefed on. Her comment reflected the kind of strategic thinking that impressed her squadron mates while remaining within the bounds of what a well-trained pilot might reasonably offer. Rodriguez nodded approvingly, recognizing the tactical sophistication underlying Maya's seemingly simple observation. Good point. We'll approach with standard intercept procedures but maintain flexibility to adapt if the situation develops differently than expected. She was beginning to understand that having Maya in her formation provided access to insights that might prove crucial for mission success. The flight to the intercept coordinates took 35 minutes, during which the unknown aircraft continued its northward course while maintaining radio silence and ignoring increasingly urgent attempts at communication from air traffic control and military authorities. Maya used the transit time to study radar updates and intelligence reports, building a mental picture of the developing situation that drew on her classified experience with similar scenarios. The intercept itself began as a textbook example of how military aircraft established contact with unidentified civilian planes, but it quickly became apparent that this situation would not follow standard patterns. The Gulfstream's pilot demonstrated flying skills that exceeded what would be expected from civilian aviation, executing maneuvers that suggested either extensive military training or involvement in operations requiring advanced piloting capabilities. Rodriguez led her formation into position alongside the civilian aircraft, close enough to establish visual contact and attempt communication through standard military intercept procedures. The Gulfstream appeared to be a standard executive aircraft, but Maya's trained eye noticed modifications that suggested capabilities beyond normal civilian specifications: enhanced communication equipment, what appeared to be jamming pods, and structural reinforcements that indicated the aircraft might be capable of performance beyond its official specifications. Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force intercept flight, Rodriguez transmitted on the emergency frequency that all aircraft were required to monitor. You are directed to acknowledge this transmission and follow our aircraft to the nearest suitable airfield for inspection and processing. Her voice carried the kind of calm authority that helped de-escalate tense situations, while making clear that compliance was not optional. The response came not through radio communication, but through the aircraft's behavior. The Gulfstream suddenly accelerated and began a climbing turn that demonstrated performance capabilities far beyond what civilian aircraft normally possessed. The pilot was clearly attempting to evade the intercept, but the maneuvers being executed suggested training and equipment that raised serious questions about the aircraft's true purpose and capabilities. Maya found herself facing the kind of tactical situation that her classified background had prepared her for extensively, but which her current cover identity theoretically shouldn't allow her to handle effectively. The Gulfstream was executing evasion maneuvers that required advanced tactical response, but responding appropriately would reveal capabilities that no rookie pilot should possess. Rodriguez made the tactical decision that removed Maya's dilemma. Ghost, take lead. You seem to understand what this aircraft is trying to do better than I do. The transmission was made on a discrete tactical frequency that allowed Rodriguez to transfer formation leadership without broadcasting the change to higher headquarters or other monitoring agencies. Maya accepted the leadership transfer with professional acknowledgement while internally shifting into the tactical mindset that had made her legendary in classified circles. The Gulfstream's pilot was good, but not good enough to evade someone with her background and capabilities. The question was whether she could resolve the situation without revealing the full extent of her qualifications. The aerial chase that developed was unlike anything the other pilots had witnessed during their conventional military careers. Maya led her formation through a series of intercept maneuvers that seemed to anticipate the Gulfstream's evasion attempts before they happened, positioning her aircraft to maintain visual contact and communication opportunities regardless of the civilian aircraft's attempts to escape. Her flying demonstrated the kind of intuitive understanding of three-dimensional tactical geometry that normally required years of specialized training to develop. She managed energy states and positioning with precision that seemed to bend physical laws to her will, keeping her formation in optimal intercept position while the Gulfstream executed increasingly desperate evasion maneuvers. How is she doing that? Lieutenant Kim transmitted on the discrete tactical frequency, his voice reflecting the awe that all four pilots were experiencing as they watched Maya systematically neutralize the Gulfstream's attempts to escape. Those maneuvers should be impossible at this altitude and airspeed. Rodriguez maintained professional composure while internally marveling at the demonstration of flying skills that exceeded anything she had seen during her military career. Maya was operating her F-16 with the kind of precision that suggested capabilities far beyond what any normal pilot possessed, but she was doing so in service of a mission that required exactly those capabilities for successful completion. The tactical situation changed dramatically when the Gulfstream's pilot made a decision that transformed the intercept from a law enforcement operation into a potential combat scenario. The civilian aircraft suddenly dove toward lower altitude while transmitting a signal that jammed military communication frequencies, indicating that this was no ordinary evasion attempt but a coordinated operation involving sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. Maya's response was immediate and decisive, demonstrating tactical thinking that drew on classified experience with similar scenarios while remaining within the bounds of appropriate military response. She directed her formation to maintain intercept position while calling for backup from air defense assets, understanding that the situation had escalated beyond what a single formation could handle effectively. "Control, Falcon Lead," Maya transmitted on the primary tactical frequency, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that helped maintain coordination during rapidly developing situations. "Unknown aircraft is employing electronic countermeasures and has initiated aggressive evasion. Request immediate support from available air defense assets and clearance for enhanced intercept procedures." The response from ground control reflected the growing concern that military authorities were feeling as the situation developed beyond the scope of routine intercept operations. "Falcon Lead, you are cleared for enhanced intercept procedures. Additional assets are en route to your position. Maintain visual contact and be prepared for possible hostile action." Maya acknowledged the clearance while simultaneously repositioning her formation to counter the Gulfstream's new tactical approach. The civilian aircraft was now flying in patterns that suggested its pilot had extensive knowledge of military intercept procedures and was attempting to exploit weaknesses in standard tactical responses. The aerial engagement that followed lasted 18 minutes and showcased flying that left ground controllers and monitoring personnel speechless. Maya led her formation through a series of tactical maneuvers that seemed to defy conventional understanding of air combat principles, maintaining intercept position despite the Gulfstream's increasingly sophisticated evasion attempts. Her tactical decisions reflected deep understanding of advanced air combat principles that most military pilots only encountered in classified training programs. She anticipated the civilian aircraft's maneuvers with uncanny accuracy, positioned her formation to maintain multiple intercept options simultaneously, and demonstrated energy management skills that seemed to violate basic physics. The resolution came when Maya executed a maneuver that forced the Gulfstream into a position where continued evasion would require the pilot to either surrender or attempt actions that would clearly indicate hostile intent. The civilian aircraft's pilot, faced with overwhelming tactical disadvantage and the arrival of additional military assets, finally responded to communication attempts and agreed to land at the designated airfield for inspection and processing. The landing and subsequent ground operations revealed that the Gulfstream had indeed been involved in sophisticated smuggling operations that required advanced piloting skills and extensive knowledge of military intercept procedures. The pilot proved to be a former military aviator who had been recruited by international criminal organizations specifically for his ability to evade official detection and response. The post-mission debrief was conducted at the highest levels of base command, with representatives from multiple intelligence agencies participating in the analysis of how the situation had been resolved so effectively. Maya's performance during the intercept had been recorded by multiple monitoring systems, providing clear evidence of capabilities that exceeded anything in her official personnel file. Colonel Morrison led the debrief with questions that probed not only the tactical details of the intercept, but also the broader implications of having someone with Maya's demonstrated capabilities operating within a conventional squadron structure. His questions were professional but pointed, designed to extract maximum information about Maya's background while respecting whatever classification boundaries were still in effect. Lieutenant Chen, Morrison began, using her formal designation while his tone suggested the conversation was moving beyond routine operational analysis. Your performance during today's intercept demonstrated tactical capabilities that go far beyond what we've seen from you previously. The maneuvers you executed suggest training and experience that aren't reflected in your current personnel file. Maya understood that the time for careful concealment of her capabilities had passed, but she was still constrained by classification requirements that limited how much she could reveal about her actual background. Sir, I've been authorized to acknowledge that my previous training included specialized programs that aren't normally documented in standard personnel files. The specifics remain classified, but I can confirm that today's mission fell within my areas of expertise. Rodriguez sat in fascinated silence as the conversation confirmed what her analytical instincts had been telling her for months. Maya was clearly operating under some form of classified assignment that required concealment of her true qualifications. But the reasons for that concealment and the extent of her actual capabilities remained mysterious. Hamilton listened to the exchange with growing awareness that everything he thought he understood about military hierarchy and advancement had been incomplete at best. The pilot he had spent months attempting to undermine had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of senior officers with decades of experience, raising fundamental questions about how talent and qualifications were actually distributed within the military system. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, with Maya providing as much information about her background as classification restrictions would allow, while Morrison and other senior officers attempted to understand the administrative and operational implications of her presence in the squadron. By the end of the session, everyone involved had a much clearer picture of who Maya really was, though many questions remained unanswered. The immediate aftermath of the successful intercept mission transformed Maya's position within the Thunderbolt Squadron in ways that went far beyond simple acknowledgement of her superior flying skills. Word of her performance spread rapidly through the pilot community, creating a reputation that would follow her throughout the remainder of her military career. But the most significant changes were occurring within the squadron itself, as pilots who had previously dismissed or underestimated Maya were forced to confront the reality that their assumptions had been completely wrong. Hamilton, in particular, was struggling with the cognitive dissonance of having his worldview systematically dismantled by evidence he could no longer ignore or rationalize away. The evening after the mission found Hamilton sitting alone in the squadron bar, staring at a drink he hadn't touched while replaying the day's events in his mind. Everything he had believed about merit, experience, and military hierarchy had been revealed as incomplete, and he was struggling to understand how someone with Maya's obvious capabilities had been allowed to endure months of treatment that now seemed not just inappropriate, but actively harmful to squadron effectiveness. Rodriguez approached Hamilton's table with the kind of careful diplomacy that characterized interactions between officers who needed to maintain professional relationships despite personal conflicts. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, settling into the opposite chair when Hamilton nodded his agreement. "I've been thinking about today," Rodriguez began, her analytical nature driving her to process the implications of Maya's revealed capabilities. "And I've been thinking about how we've been treating someone who obviously has more experience and training than any of us realized." Her comment was both an observation and an implicit criticism of the squadron's handling of Maya's integration. Hamilton met her gaze with the kind of raw honesty that emerged when professional facades were stripped away by undeniable evidence. "I've been an idiot," he said simply. "Worse than an idiot, I've been actively undermining someone who could have been teaching all of us things we never would have learned otherwise." His admission carried the weight of genuine recognition that his behavior had been both wrong and counterproductive. "The question is what we do about it now," Rodriguez replied. "Because after today, everything changes. Maya isn't going to be able to maintain whatever cover story brought her here, and we need to figure out how to work with someone whose capabilities obviously exceed our own by significant margins." Hamilton nodded slowly, understanding that Rodriguez was right about the fundamental shift that had occurred in squadron dynamics. "I need to apologize to her, publicly if necessary. And I need to figure out how to make up for months of behavior that I'm now realizing was completely inappropriate." His words reflected genuine remorse rather than tactical positioning, indicating that the day's revelations had affected him at a deep personal level. The conversation between Hamilton and Rodriguez continued late into the evening, as both officers processed the implications of discovering that their assumptions about squadron hierarchy and individual capabilities had been fundamentally incorrect. They were joined eventually by other pilots who were struggling with similar realizations, creating an impromptu discussion group focused on understanding how the squadron would adapt to its new reality. Maya herself spent the evening in her quarters, writing a detailed report about the day's mission for transmission to Colonel Reeves and other oversight authorities who needed to understand how her classified assignment was developing. The successful resolution of the intercept mission had served multiple purposes beyond the immediate tactical objectives, providing clear demonstration of her capabilities while creating opportunities for more open integration with her squadron colleagues. She understood that the careful balance she had maintained for months was no longer necessary or sustainable. Her cover had been effectively blown by the demands of operational necessity, but the revelation had occurred in a context that actually served her broader mission objectives. The squadron had seen her capabilities demonstrated in service of genuine military requirements rather than through artificial testing or evaluation scenarios. The report she transmitted to her oversight authorities reflected both satisfaction with the mission's tactical success and recognition that her assignment was entering a new phase that would require different approaches and strategies. The months of careful concealment and measured revelation had achieved their intended purposes, establishing her credibility within the squadron, while providing valuable intelligence about how elite pilots could be integrated into conventional military units. But Maya was also aware that the most challenging aspects of her assignment were yet to come. Revealing her true capabilities was only the first step in a process that was designed to evaluate how the military could better utilize its most talented personnel while maintaining the cohesion and effectiveness of conventional units. The real test would be whether her presence would strengthen or destabilize the Thunderbolt Squadron as it adapted to new understanding of what was possible in military aviation. The next morning brought new orders and new responsibilities that reflected Maya's changed status within the squadron structure. Colonel Morrison called her to his office for a private meeting that would determine how her revealed capabilities would be integrated into ongoing operations and training programs. "Lieutenant Chen," Morrison began, his tone reflecting the complex mixture of respect and uncertainty that characterized interactions with personnel whose backgrounds remained partially classified. "Yesterday's mission has created both opportunities and challenges for this squadron. Your performance demonstrated capabilities that could significantly enhance our effectiveness, but it's also raised questions about how we integrate those capabilities without disrupting established procedures and relationships." Maya understood that Morrison was wrestling with leadership challenges that extended far beyond simple personnel management. Integrating someone with her background into a conventional squadron required balancing multiple competing objectives while maintaining unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. "Sir," Maya replied, I'm prepared to take on whatever responsibilities you think would best serve the squadron's mission requirements. My goal has always been to contribute to unit effectiveness, rather than to create disruption or confusion about command structure. Her response reflected genuine commitment to supporting Morrison's leadership, while acknowledging that her revealed capabilities would necessarily change how the squadron operated. The conversation that followed would establish the framework for Maya's new role within the Thunderbolt Squadron and determine whether her integration would serve as a model for similar programs throughout the military. The successful resolution of the intercept mission had proven that elite capabilities could enhance conventional unit effectiveness, but translating that success into sustainable operational procedures would require careful planning and implementation. As Maya left Morrison's office with new responsibilities and clearer understanding of her role within the squadron, she reflected on how far she had come from the isolated anonymity that had characterized her first months at Falcon Ridge. The revelation of her true capabilities had been inevitable, but it had occurred in circumstances that validated her presence and demonstrated the value she could provide to conventional military operations. The transformation was just beginning, and the full implications of integrating elite capabilities into conventional squadron structures would unfold over the coming weeks and months. But the foundation had been established, and Maya was ready to discover whether her unique background could serve broader purposes than the classified missions that had originally defined her career. The transformation within the Thunderbolt Squadron began the morning after Maya's identity revelation, when Captain Hamilton stood before the assembled pilots with an expression that carried the weight of genuine humility. The ready room fell silent as he cleared his throat, his usual commanding presence replaced by something more vulnerable and authentic. "I owe everyone here an apology," Hamilton began, his voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of the moment. "But, most especially, I owe Lieutenant Chen an apology that's long overdue." He turned to face Maya directly, meeting her calm gaze with eyes that reflected months of accumulated regret. "I allowed my assumptions and prejudices to cloud my judgment, and I treated a fellow officer with disrespect that was both unprofessional and completely unwarranted." Maya listened with the same composed attention she brought to all military proceedings, but those who knew her well could see the subtle softening around her eyes that indicated genuine appreciation for Hamilton's words. She had expected this moment would come eventually, but hearing Hamilton acknowledge his mistakes publicly carried significance that went beyond simple professional courtesy. "What I witnessed yesterday," Hamilton continued, "made me realize that excellence comes in many forms, and that my narrow understanding of how talent develops was not just wrong, but actively harmful to this squadron's effectiveness." His words carried the ring of authentic insight, rather than mere political positioning, indicating that the previous day's revelations had affected him at a fundamental level. The ripple effects of Hamilton's apology extended far beyond the immediate moment, creating space for conversations and reflections that had been impossible, while the squadron operated under false assumptions about Maya's capabilities and background. Lieutenant Rodriguez found herself reconsidering not just her analysis of Maya, but her broader understanding of how military talent was identified, developed, and utilized throughout the service. Colonel Morrison implemented changes that reflected his growing understanding of how to integrate elite capabilities into conventional squadron structures. Maya was assigned additional responsibilities that leveraged her unique background while maintaining the command structure that kept the unit functioning effectively. She became the squadron's advanced tactics instructor, developing training programs that elevated everyone's performance without creating divisive hierarchies. The most remarkable transformation occurred in the squadron's overall culture, as pilots who had previously competed primarily with each other began focusing on collective improvement and mutual support. Maya's presence had initially been seen as threatening to established orders and relationships, but her demonstrated commitment to unit effectiveness rather than personal recognition gradually shifted the competitive dynamics in more positive directions. Lieutenant Kim, whose life Maya had potentially saved during the Red Eagle exercise, became one of her most dedicated students in the advanced tactics program. His gratitude had evolved into genuine respect for Maya's teaching abilities, and her commitment to developing capabilities throughout the squadron, rather than simply showcasing her own superior skills. The younger pilots found in Maya a mentor who understood both the technical demands of advanced flying and the personal challenges of establishing credibility within elite military units. Her patient instruction and honest assessment of their developing skills created learning opportunities that accelerated their professional growth while building confidence that would serve them throughout their careers. But the most significant changes were occurring at levels beyond the immediate squadron. As word of Maya's successful integration spread through military aviation communities and attracted attention from senior leadership interested in how similar programs might be implemented more broadly. Colonel Reeves arrived at Falcon Ridge for an extended evaluation visit that would determine whether Maya's assignment could serve as a model for other elite pilot integration initiatives. "The results exceed our most optimistic projections," Reeves explained during a private meeting with Morrison and Maya. "Lieutenant Chen's presence has not only enhanced this squadron's capabilities, but it's also provided valuable insights into how we can better utilize our most talented personnel while maintaining unit cohesion and effectiveness." Maya understood that her individual assignment was being evaluated as part of larger strategic initiatives designed to maximize military aviation capabilities in an era of increasingly complex operational requirements. Her success at Falcon Ridge would influence how similar programs were developed and implemented throughout the service, making her personal performance relevant to broader institutional objectives. The final test came during an unscheduled inspection visit from General Patricia Hawkins, the commander of Air Combat Command, who arrived at Falcon Ridge to personally evaluate the squadron's enhanced capabilities and assess the broader implications of integrating elite pilots into conventional units. Her presence created the kind of high-stakes demonstration opportunity that could either validate or undermine everything Maya and the squadron had accomplished. The evaluation flight that followed was designed to test not just individual capabilities but the squadron's ability to function as a cohesive unit, despite the dramatic differences in experience and background among its members. Maya flew as formation leader, with Hamilton, Rodriguez, and Kim as her wingmen, in a complex air superiority scenario that required precise coordination and advanced tactical execution. The mission unfolded flawlessly, with each pilot contributing their unique strengths while maintaining the kind of seamless integration that characterized truly elite military units. Maya's leadership was evident but not dominating, creating space for her squadron mates to demonstrate their own developing capabilities while ensuring that complex tactical objectives were achieved with precision and efficiency. General Hawkins observed the entire evolution from the ground control facility, monitoring not just the tactical execution but also the radio communications that revealed how the pilots were working together and supporting each other's performance. What impressed her most was the natural integration that had developed between Maya and her colleagues, creating synergies that enhanced everyone's effectiveness. The post-flight debrief was conducted with the kind of thorough analysis that characterized high-level military evaluations, but the conclusions were overwhelmingly positive. The squadron had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded standard performance metrics while maintaining the cohesion and mutual support that define successful military units. This represents a new model for how we develop and utilize our most talented personnel, General Hawkins concluded during her final briefing. Lieutenant Chen's integration has proven that elite capabilities can enhance conventional unit effectiveness without creating the disruption and resentment that we've seen in other experimental programs. Maya received formal recognition for her contributions to the squadron's enhanced capabilities, but the acknowledgement that meant most to her came from her fellow pilots who had witnessed her commitment to collective success rather than individual achievement. The respect she had earned was based not just on her superior flying skills, but on her character and dedication to developing others. Hamilton approached Maya after the general's departure, carrying with him a small package that he presented with obvious nervousness. "I wanted you to have this," he said, revealing a carefully crafted squadron patch that incorporated her call sign Ghost into the traditional Thunderbolt design. "We voted, and everyone agreed that you've earned your place here permanently." The gesture carried significance that extended far beyond simple symbolic recognition, representing acceptance and belonging that had been earned through months of patience, professionalism, and demonstrated commitment to squadron values. Maya accepted the patch with genuine emotion, understanding that it represented validation of her new identity and her successful transition from classified operations to conventional military service. The revelation of Maya's true background had ultimately strengthened rather than disrupted the squadron, creating new possibilities for excellence while maintaining the relationships and culture that made the unit effective. Her presence had challenged everyone to reconsider their assumptions about talent, merit, and military hierarchy, while demonstrating that integration of elite capabilities was possible when approached with wisdom and mutual respect. As the sun set over Falcon Ridge Air Base, Maya stood beside her F-16 for what she knew would be her final solo flight as the mysterious rookie who had shocked the aviation community with her hidden capabilities. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and new challenges as she transitioned to her permanent role as the squadron's advanced tactics instructor and mentor to the next generation of military pilots. The flight itself was pure joy, a celebration of capabilities that no longer needed to be hidden or carefully modulated for political or security reasons. Maya pushed her aircraft through maneuvers that showcased everything she had learned during years of classified operations, but she did so with the knowledge that her skills would now serve broader purposes than personal achievement or mission accomplishment. When she landed and taxied back to the squadron area, Maya found her colleagues waiting to welcome her back from what they understood was a symbolic conclusion to one chapter of her career and the beginning of another. The respect in their eyes was genuine and hard-earned, based on demonstrated character as much as superior flying skills. The transformation was complete. Maya Chen had successfully transitioned from the shadowy world of classified operations to become a respected leader within conventional military aviation, proving that elite capabilities could enhance rather than threaten established institutions when integrated with wisdom and mutual respect. Her story had become legend within military aviation circles, whispered among pilots as an example of how talent could emerge from unexpected places, and how assumptions about capability and background could be dangerously misleading. But for Maya herself, the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that her unique background was now serving purposes that extended far beyond individual achievement. The Ghost had found her home, and in doing so had helped redefine what was possible when the military's most talented individuals were properly integrated into the institutions they served. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.